The sun was descending behind the rugged peaks, casting long shadows over the pine-covered hills. A chilly breeze rustled the leaves as Mark and Emily pulled up to the remote campsite at Hollow Lake. It was a place they'd heard about through whispers and campfire tales, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead seemed to blur. Mark had always been fascinated by the paranormal, and Emily, ever the adventurous soul, couldn't resist the allure of a mysterious camping trip. They'd convinced their friends Ben and Laura to join them for the weekend, promising a thrilling adventure. As they set up their tents on the shores of Hollow Lake, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The dense forest that surrounded them seemed to press in on all sides, and the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls only added to the sense of isolation.
"Relax, Em,"
Mark said, wrapping his arms around her.
"It's just the wilderness playing tricks on you."
The group spent the day exploring the area, hiking through winding trails and fishing in the clear, glassy waters of the lake. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, its warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness. Ben, always the skeptic, rolled his eyes when Mark began telling ghost stories.
"Come on, Mark, you can't seriously believe in this stuff,"
he said, taking a sip of his beer.
"Maybe not, but it's fun to pretend, right?"
But as Mark spun tales of restless spirits and eerie encounters, an eerie chill settled over the campsite. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks dancing into the night, but the wind carried a haunting whisper that seemed to say, "I'm here." Laura shivered, pulling her jacket tight around her.
"Did anyone else hear that?"
Mark paused, his expression growing serious.
"Hear what?"
They all fell silent, listening. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all directions. "Help us. Save us. Find us." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the voices surrounded them. They sounded so real, so desperate. She clutched Mark's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" Mark reached for the flashlight, his hand trembling.
"I don't know, Em, but we need to find out."
They followed the voices into the forest, the beam of Mark's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The voices led them deeper into the woods until they came to a clearing bathed in moonlight. There, they saw it, a dilapidated cabin, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. The voices grew louder, now a cacophony of cries and pleas. Mark pushed open the creaking door, revealing a room filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets. But it was the wall that drew their attention. It was covered in photographs, hundreds of them, each one a black and white image of people who seemed to be trapped in a never-ending nightmare.
"What is this place?"
Laura whispered, her voice trembling. Emily picked up one of the photographs, her heart sinking as she saw a date scrawled on the back, 1923.
"These people, they've been here for almost a century."
As they examined the photographs, they realized that the faces in them were contorted in fear and despair, and some of them bore an eerie resemblance to people they knew.
"This can't be real,"
Ben muttered, his voice unsteady. But then, a sound echoed through the cabin, a faint, mournful wail that sent shivers down their spines. They followed the sound up a rickety staircase to the second floor, where they found a small, dusty attic. In the attic, they discovered an old journal, its pages filled with the desperate scribblings of someone who had been trapped in the cabin. The author wrote of a curse that had befallen the lake, a curse that had trapped the souls of those who had drowned there. As they read the journal, a voice echoed in their heads, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the cabin. "Help us, save us, find us." Mark looked at his friends, his face pale.
"We have to do something. We have to help them."
But as they made their way back to the campsite, they realized that the forest had changed. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the moonlight took on an eerie, sickly glow. Laura whispered, her eyes wide with fear, but it was too late to turn back now. The voices were growing louder and more insistent, and they knew that they couldn't leave without trying to help the trapped souls. They returned to the cabin, armed with flashlights and a sense of grim determination. The voices guided them to a hidden cellar door beneath the cabin, its rusted hinges creaking in protest as they pulled it open. The cellar was dark and musty, and as they descended the narrow staircase, they felt a suffocating sense of dread. The walls were lined with chains and shackles, and in the center of the room, they found a rusted metal door. Mark tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge.
"We need to find a way to break this open,"
he said, his voice determined. They searched the cellar, looking for anything that could help them. It was Emily who found it, a sledgehammer, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. With the sledgehammer in hand, Mark took a deep breath and swung it at the door. The metal buckled and groaned, but it held fast. He swung again, and this time the door burst open, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel. The voices grew louder, now a desperate, anguished chorus that seemed to fill the cellar. "Save us! Find us!" They entered the tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the inky darkness. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close around them. As they ventured more profound, they saw strange symbols etched into the stone, symbols that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light. And then, they reached the end of the tunnel, and what they saw filled them with horror and despair. In a small, cavernous chamber, they found the trapped souls, hundreds of them, their spectral forms writhing and twisting in agony.
We have to free them,
Mark said, his voice determined. But as they approached, the spirits turned to them, their faces twisted in anguish. "You can't save us," one of them whispered, its voice echoing in their heads. "We are cursed to remain here for all eternity." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked at the trapped souls.
We have to try.
She said, her voice shaking. With the sledgehammer, Mark began breaking the chains that bound the spirits. As each chain snapped, the trapped soul let out a mournful cry before disappearing into the ether. But it was a slow, agonizing process, and as the hours passed, they began to feel the weight of the curse pressing down on them.
We can't give up,
Mark said, his voice hoarse. But then, the voices grew louder, more desperate, and the walls of the chamber began to close in around them. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and the air grew thick with an evil energy.
We have to go,
Ben shouted, his voice filled with terror. But as they turned to leave, they found the tunnel had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall of stone. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, their only exit sealed off. The chamber grew colder and the trapped souls closed in around them, their faces contorted in rage and despair. The symbols on the walls pulsed with a sinister energy, and the air grew thick with a suffocating darkness. "We are cursed," one of the spirits whispered, its voice filled with bitterness. "And now so are you." With that, the spirits descended upon them, their cold, ethereal hands reaching out to claim their souls. The friends screamed, their voices echoing through the chamber as they were dragged into the darkness, joining the ranks of the trapped souls. And then, there was silence, broken only by the mournful whispers that filled the chamber. The sun rose over Hollow Lake, casting a warm golden light over the campsite. The tents were still standing and the remnants of last night's campfire smoldered in the fire pit. But there was no sign of Mark, Emily, Ben, or Laura. They had disappeared without a trace, their fate unknown to all but the cursed souls of Hollow Lake.
The forest was alive with the symphony of chirping crickets and rustling leaves as Sarah, David, Emma, and Matt made their way deeper into the wilderness. They were seeking an escape from the noise and chaos of the city, but as they ventured further from civilization, an unsettling feeling crept over them. The plan had been simple, a weekend camping trip to Silverwood National Forest. It was a sprawling, untouched expanse of nature, known for its pristine lakes and dense, ancient trees. They had heard rumors of strange occurrences in the forest, but chalked them up to overactive imaginations. Little did they know, their peaceful retreat would become a nightmare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they arrived at their chosen campsite, a small clearing by the tranquil Silver Lake. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the water. They set up their tents, gathered firewood, and soon had a crackling fire going. The firelight danced on their faces as they roasted marshmallows, sharing stories and laughter. But beneath the camaraderie, a sense of unease lingered. The forest felt different after dark, as if it held secrets that it only revealed when the sun went down. Around midnight, as they huddled around the dying embers of their campfire, they heard it, a distant, haunting melody. It was like no sound they had ever heard before, a mournful tune that seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest. "Did anyone else hear that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle night breeze. They fell silent, their ears straining to catch the eerie music. It swirled around them, growing louder and more haunting with each passing moment. David stood up, his face pale. "We should find out what that is." The others exchanged nervous glances but followed him into the dark woods. The music led them deeper into the forest, a spectral guide through the maze of towering trees. Eventually, they stumbled upon an ancient oak tree with gnarled branches that seemed to reach for the heavens. The haunting melody flowed from its twisted form, and at its base lay an old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Sarah picked up the book, her fingers trembling. As she opened it, she found handwritten notes, cryptic symbols, and accounts of strange occurrences in the forest dating back centuries. The entries spoke of a curse that was said to be triggered by a campfire on the shores of Silver Lake. Just as they were trying to make sense of the cryptic entries, the forest around them seemed to come to life. Shadows danced, and the trees whispered secrets that they couldn't comprehend. Panic set in, and they tried to retrace their steps, but the forest had become a labyrinth, trapping them in its eerie embrace. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity. Their flashlights flickered, their phone screens displayed no signal, and the eerie music never ceased. Exhausted and terrified, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Desperation forced them inside. The cabin was a decrepit shell of what it once was. Tattered curtains swayed in the breeze, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. In the center of the room stood an old stone fireplace, its ashes long cold. Above it on the wall were etched strange symbols, mirroring those they had seen in the journal. As they examined the symbols, the room grew colder, and the atmosphere turned oppressive. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to come to life, twisting and writhing like malevolent spirits. Suddenly a voice filled the cabin, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You have trespassed on sacred ground. The curse has awakened." They turned, their hearts pounding, to see a ghostly figure materialize before them. It was a man, his face twisted in anguish, his eyes empty voids of despair. "You have ignited the campfire curse," the figure continued. "For centuries it has lain dormant, but you have awakened it with your fire, and now you are trapped here with me." The room seemed to close in around them, and they realized they were no longer alone. Ghostly figures emerged from the shadows, their faces contorted in pain and anger. "Help us, save us, find us," they whispered in unison. The friends tried to flee, but the cabin seemed to stretch and contort, its walls closing in like a vice. The ghostly figures drew closer, their cold, ethereal hands reaching out to claim the intruders. In a desperate attempt to break free, they rushed toward the fireplace where the cursed symbols glowed with an eerie light. David grabbed a piece of firewood and swung it at the symbols, shattering them with a deafening crack. The world around them seemed to tremble, and the ghostly figures wailed in agony as they dissipated into the darkness. The cabin itself crumbled, and the friends were plunged into a blinding light. When they opened their eyes, they were back at their campsite by Silver Lake, the first light of dawn painting the sky. The forest was still, the eerie music silenced, and the oppressive presence lifted. They packed up their belongings in stunned silence, their memories of the night's horrors already fading like a dream. As they left Silverwood National Forest, they couldn't help but wonder if they had truly broken the curse, or if it was merely biding its time, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers to light a campfire by the cursed shores of Silver Lake.